Not only did she lose a daughter, her oldest daughter, but she has to bury two grandbabies. No parent should have to bury their children or their grandchildren. Only a monster could do that. Only a person that has no regard for human life, especially for a baby, could do something that extreme.
Neighbors and family believe cousin ran to help when he heard the commotion and was shot.
If my brother sacrificed his life to save a child or attempt to save a child, I am 100%.
Here's a man who spent time in prison, got out, moved back in with his ex, and somehow convinced her to plan a wedding. Bold move. Then, a month before the wedding, she figured out what a lot of women in her position eventually figure out, that he wasn't the man worth marrying. So she ended it, kicked him out, told people he'd threatened her with a gun. He didn't take that well. In fact, he took it about as badly as a person can take anything. 1 month later, 4 people were dead, including his own 6-year-old son. Her name was Takeyra Collins, 25 years old. Everyone who knew her says the same thing about her, almost word for word. She was a mother first. Not in the soft, generic way people say that at a funeral. In the literal way. Her schedule ran through 2 kids. Her plans ran through 2 kids. Her whole idea of the future had 2 names attached to it. Armond Jr., 6 years old, and Aubree, 2. She worked. She kept pushing. Friends said all she wanted was something stable for her and her babies. The man standing in the way of that was Armond Johnson Sr., her fiancé, the father of her son. This wasn't a relationship with a clean history. There had been prior allegations, a protective order. Takeyra had already gone to the legal system once before and asked it to keep this man away from her. The system did what it usually does with paperwork like that. It filed it. Then, in March of 2019, Johnson got out of prison, and instead of staying away, he moved back in with her. They started planning a wedding. Here's the part where you'd expect some kind of turning point, some big reveal about why she gave him another chance. There isn't one in the record. What is in the record is this. About a month before the murders, Takeyra called off the engagement. She told people he'd been abusive. She told people he'd threatened her with a gun. And she did the one thing that, statistically, is often the most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship. She ended it. He was out of the house. He was out of the wedding. And by every account available, he did not take it as an ending. He took it as a problem to be solved. Nobody wrote down exactly what happened in the 4 weeks that followed. No detailed diary of his mood, no paper trail of threats leading up to July. What we know is what came after. And what came after was not the behavior of a man who'd made peace with being left. On July 8, 2019, that month ran out. David Cousin Jr. lived upstairs from Takeyra. 35 years old. He wasn't part of any of this. He wasn't a witness, wasn't a friend, wasn't tangled up in the relationship in any way. He was just a neighbor, walking home. That's what killed him. Sometime that night, Johnson shot him in the head and chest and left his body in a vacant lot next to the house. Wrong place, wrong time. In the most literal sense, a phrase like that can be used. Then he went after Takeyra. She was shot 10 times in her own bedroom. Not once, not twice, 10 times. That's not the number of a man losing control in the heat of an argument. That's the number of a man making sure. Her children were in the house. Armond Jr., 6, was in his bedroom. At some point, 2-year-old Aubree woke up. In whatever confusion a toddler feels in the middle of the night with smoke starting to fill the air, she got up and went looking for her brother. That's where they were found, together in his room, both gone from smoke inhalation, because after killing Takeyra, Johnson set the house on fire. Think about the order of operations there for a second. He didn't panic and run. He shot 2 adults, and then he took the time to start a fire in a house he knew had 2 children inside, including his own son. That's not an act of rage. Rage doesn't pause to grab a lighter. He left the scene. No confession, no turning himself in, nothing close to it. Cleveland police found Cousin's body first, sometime between 8 and 9 that morning. While they were working the scene, a tip pointed them toward a house nearby. They didn't need long to figure out something was wrong. They smelled the smoke before they even reached the door. They forced their way in. That's when they found Takeyra and the children. Police wouldn't say much publicly about the relationship at first. What they did confirm, carefully, was that there was a documented history of domestic violence between Johnson and Takeyra. They said it, and then they said they'd let the prosecutor's office handle the rest. Standard procedure. Frustrating to hear if you're the one asking questions, but standard. The community didn't wait for the full picture before it started grieving. A vigil was held that same week at the corner where it happened. People came in purple and white, released balloons, cried in the street for a woman and 2 kids most of them had never personally met but somehow already understood. Armond Jr. had been an active member of the Boys and Girls Club, and when the police held their press conference about the case, dozens of kids from the club showed up too. Kids who'd lost a friend and didn't fully have the words for it yet, holding up his photo because that's the only way some of them knew how to say his name out loud. Takeyra's family made one thing clear early. If anyone saw a GoFundMe going around claiming to raise money for them, it wasn't real. They hadn't set one up yet. Even in the middle of burying 3 people, someone still had to think about protecting them from being exploited on the way out. As for Johnson, he didn't get caught trying to explain himself, didn't get caught confessing under pressure. He got picked up on an unrelated aggravated robbery warrant, the kind of small, sloppy detail that ends up mattering more than it should. He wasn't hiding well enough to avoid police entirely, he just wasn't answering for the right crime yet. Once they had him, the rest followed fast. He was charged with 4 counts of aggravated murder. A judge set his bond at $5 million. He pleaded not guilty. Officers at the press conference were asked directly whether they understood the position they were in, charging a man with killing his own son. They said they understood it fully. They just weren't going to let that complicate the case. It didn't. The trial didn't happen until 2022, 3 years after the fire. 3 years of a case sitting in a queue while a $5 million bond kept Johnson out of the way and nowhere near a courtroom that could actually decide anything. When it finally started, his defense went where these defenses usually go. They questioned the DNA. They questioned the cell phone evidence. They poked at the investigation, looking for a crack wide enough to matter. It wasn't wide enough. The jury deliberated for more than 9 hours and came back with guilty on 14 counts of aggravated murder, along with the other charges stacked on top. They did acquit him on 1 count tied to aggravated burglary, the only piece of the state's case that didn't fully hold. Everything else did. The prosecutor didn't dress it up. He called Johnson a vile individual and said the verdict was the first step in bringing him to justice. Takeyra's aunt, Tiffany, put it simpler than that. She said they were just glad justice was served for Takeyra and for the kids. Because of how many people died, because 2 of them were children, because there was arson and a witness killed on top of it, Johnson qualified for the death penalty. Ohio doesn't hand that down lightly, and neither did this jury. In the penalty phase, his attorneys brought forward what they had, that he read at a 4th grade level, that his own childhood had been marked by abuse and neglect. Whatever any of that says about how he became who he became, the jury decided it was enough to keep him alive. Not enough to explain what he did, enough to spare him. Judge Timothy McCormick handed down the actual sentence a few weeks later. 4 consecutive life terms, no parole. Not 1 life sentence for 4 deaths. 4 stacked on top of each other, 1 for every name. So here's where the case technically ends. A man in prison for the rest of his life, no appeal that's going to undo 14 counts of aggravated murder. Justice, on paper, served. But paper is exactly the problem, isn't it? Takeyra had already been through the system once before any of this happened. A protective order existed. It existed on file, in a courthouse, doing exactly what protective orders do when the person they're supposed to stop simply decides not to care, which is nothing. It didn't stop him from getting out of prison. It didn't stop him from moving back in with her. It didn't stop him from being in that house with that gun on that night. Her friend said it plainly, not long after it happened, she felt like the system had failed her. Not he was a monster, though he was. Not nobody could have seen it coming, because in a lot of ways, people had. The system had the paperwork. The system had the warning. The system just didn't have anything that actually stood between Takeyra and the door. Armond Jr. was 6. He liked his club. He had friends who marched to the scene where he died just so they could grieve somewhere that felt like it mattered. Aubree was 2, old enough to wake up in the smoke and go looking for her brother, not old enough to understand why nobody came. Takeyra Collins didn't do anything wrong. She left. That's the whole story. If you strip away everything else, a woman left, and a man decided that leaving wasn't allowed. 4 people paid for that decision. Only one of them made it. If you enjoy true crime content, make sure to subscribe to Love to Death channel for more shocking cases, in-depth investigations, and updates on stories like this one. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Fair use notice. This video is for educational and commentary purposes only. All footage and images used fall under fair use guidelines as protected under Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act.